Okay, so this is retired Judge McKay Chavan. Judge Chavan served in Jefferson County for 18 years as a circuit court judge. Circuit court handles felonies. Yes. And what type of civil cases?
Anything
Over 5,000.
Over 5,000. Yes.
Well done. That puts you way ahead of most people
In general society, right?
Society, yeah, that's pretty good.
But he served in the Jefferson Circuit Court. There are 13 different circuits in Jefferson County, so he was one of 13 judges. I will brag on him just a little bit. I think he was one of the most fair, and he had some of the most well thought out opinions of any judge in Jefferson County. Frankly, in probably the whole state. I'll let him talk about his probation policies because they were different than most of the other judges ran their probation. He was a lot more involved and hands-on in trying to make sure that those in his courtroom did not have the recidivism rate that we have in our current society. So, with that being said, thank you so much for being here.
I appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Thanks for taking this class. I think it's cool that you're interested in this. So, in the interest of your interest, anytime you have a question about anything, just stop me because I want to answer your questions. I can talk really good at nonstop forever, but I do want to touch on the things that you all are most interested in. So, is it criminal stuff that you're most interested in, right? Yeah, I mean that's the juicy stuff. Let's not get ourselves. Yeah. So a circuit court docket is divided into a criminal docket and a civil docket. The civil docket, as you know, is things over $5,000, but that covers such an incredibly wide range of stuff. It's anything from it could be a contract case, it could be a dog bite case, it could be a car wreck, it could be a medical malpractice, a legal malpractice, anything that you can think to sue somebody about where the damage is more than $5,000, which is it's a huge range. And the reason that I bring that up is that's what makes it such a cool job. Is because it's really everything. If you're practicing law, you kind of do A to B or maybe A to C. But if you're in the courtroom as a judge, you're touching on A to Z. There's everything under the sun. You get to kind of get your feet wet in at least. Criminal docket, as you mentioned, is felonies. A felony is anything over a year. Correct. And the difference is you spend that year, anything over a year, you go to state prison as opposed to the county jail if you're required to serve it. Let's talk about the criminal docket. So there are two kinds of people in the world. People who think that there are two kinds of people in the world, people who don't. For the people who think there are two kinds of people in the world, thank you for that. If you think there are two kinds of people in the world, generally what you think of is there are good people and bad people. And good people get what they have earned, and bad people get what they deserve. And for the people who think there are two kinds of people in the world, they think the people on the wrong side of the V, Commonwealth versus them, are quote unquote bad people. That makes us comfortable because if they're bad people, we'll never find ourselves there. Who thinks that's true? Excellent. The people on the wrong side of the V are people who are generally undereducated, underemployed, under the influence, which is a huge part of it, underserved in terms of their mental health needs. 50% of people in prison have a diagnosable, profound sometimes mental health issue. And then this is a harsh thing to say, but I'm gonna call it underraised, that they didn't have somebody in their life to show them the right way, I'm gonna say, to show them, to guide them along. And you know, without that guidance as a kid, you're kind of on your own. And sometimes you not only do not get good guidance, you get terrible guidance. You get bad examples. And if you're surrounded by bad examples, it's really, really hard to figure out on your own that what I'm seeing is not the way things are, that there's a different way to do things. So it's not surprising that, and it's not one of those things, it's usually a combination of those things that get you on the wrong side of the V. And to be honest, also, the majority of those folks are underfunded. They're poor. There's not a lot of those things kind of go hand in glove. if you have resources, you can probably get some of those services that you need. You can probably get a better education. There's things that you can do to break that cycle. So it's not one thing, it's all those things combined. But it doesn't turn you into a bad person. You may have done some terrible things. And I've known bad people. I've known probably 30 years, 35 years. I was a state prosecutor, I was a federal prosecutor, and then I was a judge. And I've probably in all that time dealing strictly with criminal law, known 5 bad people. And by bad people, I mean people who there's no moral center. Like they could come in here and kill somebody, kill all of us, and it wouldn't change their day. 5 people. Everybody else is some version of the person I'm describing to you. That doesn't surprise you, right? I'm glad, because it's as a judge, people, when they see you out in the wild and they know you're a judge, they'll say, "Hey, you locking them all up?" No, we're locking the ones up that for whatever reason are unsafe to live amongst us. That's it. You don't lock everybody up. You lock up the people who, but for being locked up, are going to hurt themselves or hurt other people. So I used to teach at called Baby Judges College, where you're a brand new judge, and people who've never had a criminal docket or never had criminal experience have to kind of break that preconceived notion of these are bad people who are doing bad things, and so bad things should happen. So the general rule that I tell young judges is, you don't send people to prison because you're mad at them, or because you're disappointed in them, or you're frustrated with them, or you don't like them, or you don't like what they did. You only send people to prison that you're afraid of. And by afraid of, I mean that you're afraid they're going to hurt somebody else, they're going to hurt themselves. That prison is not option 1, it's the last option. But it's an important part of the process. Punishment is a valuable tool in changing people's behavior. It's not a great tool in preventing bad behavior. People who get themselves into a situation that might get them in trouble with the law aren't really thinking about the consequences, because if they are, they don't do it. If that's going to keep you from getting in trouble, it's already happened, right? By the time you're in the middle of that thing, it's too late, and you've missed all the signs that say danger, danger. It's not going to end well. You're going to get in big trouble, and it's going to change your life. The most depressing thing, I don't know, I'm beating on this, but it's worth talking about. The combination of those things for the people in the criminal docket, particularly young people, what it does is it robs them of hope, and it prevents them from seeing a future. So they don't see the consequences, but they also don't see the opportunities. So if you didn't think that you were going to live another year, you probably wouldn't come to school today. You would make very different choices about how you spent your day. Because to you, it wouldn't matter. You would think nothing I could do is going to make any difference in how my life turns out. If you think that way, it doesn't mean it's true. But if you think it's true, you kind of manifest it into being true. If you think that's true, it might as well be true, because you act accordingly. It changes your approach to the world.
And Judge, if I can just interject a little bit, I think that it's important that you all understand that there are a significant amount of people that come before the judge that they have that exact mindset. So
yeah, sure.
I know me as a prosecutor and my husband as a police officer have had conversations with people, mine probably more limited than my husband's, he's had more, but they did not, if they saw their 20th or 21st birthday, it was a win. And they were considered, one of the, for lack of one of the OGs. They were one of the older people in their group. So, and that's what they would refer to themselves generally, but they don't have that hope. So if the general perception is that, I'm probably only going to live to 19 years old, well then that's the only hope that they have, and the decisions that they make are based upon that.
Yeah, or if prison is the norm, like for you all, you were going to go to kindergarten, grade school, and high school. That's what was expected of you. And if all the people around you were were dropping out of high school and going to prison, then that would be the norm for you. So it's a social problem more than a justice system problem, but the justice system is sort of tasked with doing a lot more than it was probably designed to do. And it comes as a shock to some judges that the joke I make, because it's true, is I said, well, I started out as a judge, but then I became basically an addiction counselor for all these people who came in front of me who just, because of their substance use disorder, which we say now, we don't say drug addict anymore. Why don't we say drug addict? If you call somebody a drug addict, what does that sound like?
Sounds like that's all they want to do.
Yeah, it's like it's your character, like you're a degenerate. It's calling you a name. And it keeps you from seeing that what you have is and I believe this, I know this to be true based on experience, seeing it so many times. If I said, hey, you have cancer, you wouldn't feel like that was your fault, right? You wouldn't feel like you were a jerk or that you were, somebody was calling you out. You'd say, oh my gosh, what do I do to get rid of the cancer? How do I survive this, you know? Addiction's basically a fatal disease. It kills people, you know, as much or more than cancer. It will ultimately kill you in one way or another. And if you think of it that way, if you say substance use disorder, it's not just the fact that you're kind of, you know, using this politically correct term. It really does change the conversation. It's like, so that means you should get help as opposed to punishment. Or you can't say to somebody, hey, you know how you've been your whole life? Seriously, stop it. In fact, stop it today, because if you don't stop it today, you're going to prison tomorrow. I mean, who makes it to the weekend? There's no way. So that leads into the what do we do about this discussion? And you know, different people have different philosophies. So a very popular notion is just to lock people up for a long time. And there are people who you gotta lock up. There's just no way around it. If you've never told somebody that they have to go to prison, I can promise you it's not a pleasant or easy thing. Sometimes it's clearly the thing you need to do, but there's no joy in it, there's no celebration. Nobody wins when somebody goes to prison. When I was a young prosecutor, we got a probation revocation hearing, and that's where everybody knows what probation is? All right, get some head nods. So probation is, I'm not gonna send you to prison today, you're not going to prison today, but here are the rules. You gotta do all these things. As long as you do these things, then you don't have to go to prison. But if you violate your probation, then there are going to be consequences, up to and including you could have your sentence imposed. So if you have a 5-year sentence, you're on probation for 5 years, and if any time during that 5 years you mess it up in a way that is serious enough to call for that ultimate consequence, then you go to prison for 5 years. The 5 years stays constant. It's over your head till the last day of the 4th year. So so I'm having one of these revocation hearings, and as a young lawyer, as a young prosecutor, it's a good thing to do because you get a chance to, you're on your feet, you know, I'm talking to the judge, I'm asking questions, I'm cross-examining a witness, I'm directing a witness, making an argument, a closing argument. So it's great practice for develop your lawyering skills. So I, revocation hearing, and the person gets revoked, and the experienced prosecutor, the terrific prosecutor, said to me afterwards, he said, now, you did a good job. You were well prepared. You asked good questions on direct, really good cross-examination of the witness, and you made a very coherent, concise, spot-on argument to the judge. But here's the thing. When that person, when the defendant leaves the courtroom through the door that leads to the jail, goes through that door, you point to the door, they don't disappear. They go to a terrible place that will impact them and their families for the rest of their lives. Oh, damn, that just got real. It's like, oh my God, you're right. He said, it's not a debate. It's not a contest. There's no winners and losers here. But never forget that these people are real people. That's an incredibly valuable lesson for a, you know, young, headstrong, testosterone-driven prosecutor, you know, who thinks of it as winning and losing, and your ego gets involved in it. It absolutely does. So that was a valuable lesson for me at the beginning, and it's one I carried over into the courtroom, so that understanding that laws are passed categorically. So, for example, there'll be a law that says if you're a convicted felon, you cannot have a handgun. That's the law. And it applies to everyone. Equally, everyone is bound by that law, everyone is protected by that law. But once they're in front of the court, you don't sentence people categorically. Why not? Why isn't everybody treated the same, exactly the same, if they broke the same law?
Because everybody has a different situation.
Yes, because it's, you judge people individually, because everybody's different, and everybody's circumstances are different, and every case is a little bit different. There's variations on the theme, but in that big box of people who were possessing a handgun while they were convicted felon, there's a guy who had a felony for, because he stole $100 from Target when he was a cashier there when he was 18 years old, and now he has a food truck, and he's open late at night and has a lot of cash, so he keeps a gun under the register. And then there's a guy who's had 7 convictions for assault with a deadly weapon who has a gun. Are they the same person? Should they be treated the same? No. That's why you have judges, and that's why judges need to be aware that the people who come in front of them, 1, are people, and 2, that they're individual people. Similarly situated people should be treated similarly, but it's not similar enough that you're convicted of the same crime. That's why people say, oh my gosh, this person was convicted of this crime, they got probated, this person got sent to prison. Yeah, that's perfectly acceptable if you look beyond the charge, you look beyond, if you look a little deeper, the deeper you go, hopefully the more sense it makes. So, if everything I said is true about how people get there, the question is, what do you do once they're there? How do you effectively deal with somebody who has not had those things that I mentioned? What do you do? You can't make a bad person into a good person. What can you do with a person who's uneducated?
Education.
Yes. What can you do with somebody who is underemployed?
Not doing a job.
Yeah. And what do you do with somebody who's under the influence? Yeah, there we go. What do you do with somebody who has been underserved for their mental health needs? And what do you do for somebody who's been underparented, underguided? There you go. So it ain't complicated. I mean, if you think about it, it's not really what we're set up to do. So I was a judge, I was an addiction counselor, and the final part of that is eventually I just turned into a life coach. Dude, what you're doing is not working. Because if it was, we wouldn't know each other. You wouldn't be here. So we got to figure out while you're here, what can we do to get you to a better place? And it's pretty fascinating. So I had a program called Smart Prevention, which is the world's greatest acronym, because the idea is it's smarter to try and help people than it is to punish people and just hope they'll figure it out on their own. So SMART stood for supervision, motivation, accountability, responsibility, and treatment. And the idea was when you were probated, you might do a little jail time. It's never, almost without exception, if you got convicted of a felony, you probably saw the inside of the jail at some point, even if it's just for a weekend. But something probably happened where you were on home incarceration. There was some kind of, there was a punishment element to it. Because psychologically that's actually a pretty big thing. Because if you're not once you're punished for something, you can start to put it behind you. But if the punishment is always looming over your head, it's kind of it seems weird, but it's not, it's hard to get past it. I think that makes sense. So if I said, hey, cut it out or I'm gonna punish you, stay, as opposed to, hey, I'm gonna punish you and then we're gonna move past it, it's just psychologically different. So there's usually a little bit of punishment, but once they were probated, they would come back and we'd have what was my colleagues called the kumbaya, which is we'd all get together kind of like this. We'd just sit around a table. The judge comes down from the bench and you take your robe off. So if you know a judge, it turns out judges aren't that big a deal. But if you don't know a judge and you think of them as kind of almost a different category of person, it freaks people out. Freaks defendants out when the judge comes and sits with them. What's up? This is weird. It breaks down a whole lot of barriers that you can't have to the conversation you need to have, which is not the conversation you can have while you're sitting up on the bench in your robe. So you have this conversation. We talk about thematically, it would be taking control of your life. But in order to do that, you had to convince people that they could do that. So the supervision part was, you have a probation officer. This probation officer is not there to watch you, the probation officer is there to help you. A supervisor is somebody to help you do your job right. And your job is to work on yourself, to deal with the problems that you have. And when you have a problem, you go to your supervisor and you ask for help. You don't try and hide the problem from your supervisor. It makes it worse. You go to that person. That is the person who's in charge of your well-being. And if you approach it that way, you'll do much better than if you think of it as your own personal police officer. The motivation part is the one I think is most interesting. That was an M. The motivation part is, it's not the judge's motivation, the probation officer's motivation. What I would tell them is, you have to be motivated for this. You have to want more and better and different. Because if you do, you can get it. But if you don't, you won't. It doesn't just happen. It's not like winning the lottery. You have to work at it. There are things that require you to make some effort here that maybe you haven't made before. And at times it's going to be hard. And if you're not sufficiently motivated to do that work, you will not get the results. For a lot of women in the system, this was an important discussion to have, because a lot of the women in the system are there, not because, but one of the things that they have in common is incredibly low self-esteem. And so I would say during these meetings, I'd say it's possible, in fact it's likely, that there's been somebody in your life, or more than one somebody, who's made it very clear to you that you aren't worth a damn, that you're no damn good. And they may have started to believe it. And if they did, if you started to believe that, then it's very hard to get out of your own way. But what I'm going to tell you is, you absolutely are worth the effort that you need to make, and we're going to make. You're a good person. You have value. And the women would start crying, because without exception, women would start crying because that was so real in their lives, that they did not feel valued. So once they felt valued, they could start to take control. But if you don't think that you're worth the effort, you don't make the effort. So motivation was important. Accountability was where if you make a bad choice, there will be consequences. You will be held accountable. And accountability is different than responsibility. Accountability is where I hold you responsible. Responsibility is when you hold yourself accountable. That you take charge. You take the power away from me, and you decide your own fate. Don't leave it up to me. Don't leave it up to the probation officer. Take control. If you take responsibility, once we get to the point where you're responsible for your actions, you will make better choices. And then T was for treatment, because everybody who was in that discussion needed something, whether it was addiction counseling, whether it was mental health counseling, or medications, education, a job, all those things was what happened, what they needed. Everybody needed something, is what it comes down to. So it was relatively successful relative to standard probation, because it was very intense and very personal. And so we had I think our recidivation rate was 4 times less than what other people's were. And the great part about smart probation is every week still, as I'm walking down the street somewhere, somebody will stop me and say, "Hey, you're my judge." Yeah, it's the bow tie. And so they'll say, "You're my judge." I'm like, "Yeah, how's it going, man?" It's going great. I got this great job. I've been clean for 2 years. I'm in a relationship. All these things have happened. And they'll say, this is the interesting part to me, they'll say, "Man, you saved my life." And I say, absolutely not. Now, for some people, it's true that I probably kept them from killing themselves through drugs, alcohol, and other misadventures. But I always tell them, I didn't do anything. All I did was give you the opportunity to save your own life. And I wasn't there when you made all those decisions that led to all these great results. That's on you. You did that, not me. You get the blame if you didn't, so you should take the credit because you did. And that's very rewarding. That's why it was probably, looking back on it, it's probably the most important thing I did on the bench. I think it had the most impact. The judge job is an amazing public service job. because you make very, very, very important decisions that impact people's lives directly, and you do it while they're sitting there looking at you, which is very different than the legislature or the executive branch. It's personal. It's that person looking at you for the help that they came to get in this place. That's what a courthouse is. We couldn't resolve this outside or otherwise, so we need your intervention to make this, to fix this problem that maybe even of our own creation, but we need your help. And judges who approach the job that way, I think, get more out of it, that you are there to serve the public. And part of that service now in this day and age is helping people help themselves. So that's what I think about the criminal docket. Thoughts? Questions?
Okay, I'll start off the questions.
Yeah.
Okay, I had some other classes do some questions.
Okay.
What has been one of your most difficult cases that you've had come before you?
Okay. So judges are in the decision-making business, and decisions sometimes are very clear, but it doesn't make them easy. Here is what I am convinced is the right thing to do, but doing it is one's thought and the other's action. When you put that thought into action and you recognize the consequences it has, it can be very difficult. There were the hardest decisions you make have to do with whether punishment decisions. They're the hardest ones. I had two cases. Here's a case. A young woman is walking to the store with her sister. Her sister's being terrorized by this 14-year-old girl. Beats her up every day. They get to the store, and the 14-year-old bully is waiting for them to leave. So the 18-year-old sister has a knife in her purse, and she takes the knife out, and as she walks out to get back to their home and have to pass this young woman, the woman starts beating the crap out of her. She has the knife. She's trying to scare her off the knife. She grabs her by the hair. She's hitting her, and the young lady slashes out, and she hits her right in the femoral artery, so she bleeds out and dies. So she's charged with murder. She had a terrible lawyer, which is a different story. Judges spend a lot of time protecting people from their shitty lawyers, which is the thing that happens. It's really, really frustrating. So she had a terrible lawyer. She was good on the stand, thank God, and she was good on the tape she gave to the police, because otherwise she could have got convicted of murder. So she gets convicted of reckless homicide. Now, reckless homicide, you know, lesser included offenses. So if you're charged with murder, hope you're not. If you're charged with murder, the jury gets instructed on other offenses as well that fold into that crime. So murder is, I did this thing with the intention that you die as a result of it. It's what I did combined with what's in my heart when I was doing it. Manslaughter is, I did this thing, but I wasn't trying to kill you. I was only trying to cause you serious physical injury. Or when I did that, I was acting under extreme emotional disturbance. Manslaughter, too, is when I did this thing, I wasn't aware of the substantial and unjustifiable risk that you could die. I was aware of this. I was aware there's a risk that you could die. I did it anyway, and you died. That's what that is. It's called wanton murder, or wanton manslaughter.
That's typically like we were talking about the DUI,
DUI is a wanton
death,
murder. Yeah.
the DUI homicides. That would be an example of that.
We don't have a vehicular homicide statute because we have wanton murder and manslaughter. And the difference between wanton murder and manslaughter is just this simple phrase: extreme indifference to the value of human life. So you are aware of and consciously disregard the substantial unjustifiable risk that the death would occur, and the difference is for murder, it has to be done under circumstances manifesting extreme indifference to the value of human life. And you take that phrase out, and it's manslaughter. So, or you take that element out. The Commonwealth has to prove that element. So, so here she is, and I got a courtroom full of people, and on reckless homicide, you're eligible for probation. But she did take a life, you know. So I probated. And the reason I'm telling you that story is because she then went to She stayed out of trouble for 5 years. She graduated from the University of Louisville and went to nursing school. That's a win, but that doesn't make it a good decision. The point of that is, decisions aren't, you don't judge a decision by how it ultimately turned out, because you can't control that. A decision, here's a terrible decision. I'm gonna flip a coin, heads that probates you, tails you go to prison. And it may be that if you went to prison, it was a good thing. It may be that if you were probated, you cured cancer. Yay, you probated it. But it's a terrible decision no matter how it turns out because of the way you made it. Decision making is not a result, it's a process. And so the process has to be pure, that you have to make that decision based on the available information, and you have to do it, the magic word is dispassionate. Tell me what that means. What's dispassionate? What's passionate mean? Full of emotion. Say it. Yeah, passion, like or really, it's more like an emotional thing. Yeah, enthusiasm is emotional. Yeah, so that I'm caught up in my feelings about this thing. Dispassion is the opposite of that. That it doesn't mean you don't feel the things that other people feel when they are exposed to something terrible. If you have when a child is molested or a child is killed, it hurts. It's awful. You feel that, especially as you get older. You're a parent. You're like, oh my God, it's the worst thing. But what you have to do as judges and as jurors is you set aside those feelings. You don't not feel them, but you don't base your decisions on how you're feeling. You base your decisions on what the facts of the law are. And that's a very important thing to do. And not everybody can do it. If you can't do it, you're probably in the wrong job. Decision making is a process, but the key element to a decision is thoughtfulness and being dispassionate. So the toughest decisions I had to make were where you had to actually do that, where you had to not be driven by the horror of the circumstances, by the feelings that it generated, that you sometimes could get caught up in.
And I think it's important to point out too, for everyone in the courtroom, the prosecution, the judge, the defense counsel, the jury, you have both sides sitting there staring at you the entire time. So you have the victim's side, you have that family that will never be the same again because of the decision that was made. And then you also have the defendant's side, who frankly, they will never be the same either because of a decision was made. They're on two polar opposite ends of the spectrum. Absolutely. However, they are both, their lives will never be the same. And that's something that in a situation where a life was taken and the judge is making the decision to probate someone, that is while the victim's family is looking at you. So you have to be sensitive to all of those different factors that are in a courtroom.
There's other things that you have to do to kind of shield yourself to the judge. So I call it the judge zone. So you might be having a really bad day, and that should not impact the people who appear before you that day. You're just in a bad mood, it happens. You're not feeling well, you're fed up, whatever it is. Or the opposite, you're just feeling great, so your decisions change based on how you feel. You catch me on a good day, you got a good result. You catch me on a bad day, you're screwed. It can't work that way. So I had a series of little reminders from when I left my office to get to the bench that would get me in the zone. And there was a couple of interesting things. One was everybody seen To Kill a Mockingbird? I read it. Read it. Watch the movie. Call me when she does.
I did that freshman year.
Yeah, so it's a great book. You should read it about every 10 years because your perspective changes on it. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. So the facts are the same. Nothing changes about what happened to that young woman, but the perspective on those facts changes dramatically. Like, facts are facts. They do not change, but your perspective on those facts can alter your feeling about those facts, can alter the truth, what you see as the truth about those facts dramatically, depending on where you're standing. So, in that room, you've got people who feel with all their hearts that this should happen, and people who feel with all their hearts that the opposite of that should happen. And the judge, the whole reason we have judges is to be dispassionate about it. That's why we don't let victims' families sentence defendants. That's why we don't let defendants' families sentence defendants. That's why we've turned it over to somebody who can look at the facts, look at the law, and render a fair, a neutral verdict according to law, and not what you feel about something. So as I'm walking from my desk to the bench, I pass a couple things that remind me of to get in the zone. And the first one is a poster from To Kill a Mockingbird. It shows Atticus Finch. If you haven't seen it, Atticus Finch, it's a great story. It's an interesting story. It's another example of perspective, how your perspective can change on that story through time and through your life experience. People read the exact same book and get completely different messages from it. But the bottom line is I saw Atticus Finch. From my perspective, he's a person who made decisions without taking into account or not being driven by the political, personal, or professional consequences of that action. That's his mantra. Do what's right, not what without fear of those consequences. So that's the first thing I'd see. I had a hat that a friend of mine had given me. Actually, one of my best friend's father gave to me, who had a really bad experience in the courtroom where he was treated dismissively. They talked around him, they talked down to him. He was disrespected, and he didn't take it personally, but he was such a good guy. His fear was that other people would be disrespected as well. He could take it, but it really kind of broke his heart that that's the way the system works. So he gave me this hat, and that hat reminds me to remember that everybody, that it's not my day in court. I'm here every day. It's the person sitting at that table. It's their day at court, and to talk to them like they're a person. So I would always introduce myself and say, "How are you, Mr. So-and-so? I'm Keisha, I'm the judge here," and I'm also hilarious, so I might say something funny. Yeah. So, but it just relaxes people, and it acknowledging them is a little thing to do, but it makes a huge difference in how they see that experience. So I saw the hat, and then there were actually 8 of these things, but the most important one was the robe. Why do judges wear robes? So they can wear shorts underneath? No. Why do they wear robes? What do you think? It's a symbol of.
Because I watched a documentary on it.
Oh, really?
I can't remember.
So
I was with my dad. It's like something about. It's like uniform. So there's no what's the word? There's no. I don't know the word.
Well, but that's a good thought.
Yeah.
There's no what?
Variation.
Yes.
Yeah, it's uniform. Yeah, that's good. I actually never thought that way, but I thought, yeah, uniform across judgedom, yeah, as opposed to a uniform. Police officers wear a uniform. Why do they wear a uniform? To identify them, yeah. So if somebody walks if you're not in the school, but somebody walks into a place where you're on and say, "Hey, there's a fire, get out." You might leave, you might not. Police officer walks in, a fireman walks in and says, "Hey, there's a fire, get out." You're like, well, the building's on fire, run, you know? So it's a shorthand for authority, but it's not just that. So judges sit up higher than everybody else. They're literally looking, their perspective of a judge is literally and figuratively different than everybody else in the courtroom, because the judge is looking this way and everybody else is looking that way. And the judge is a little higher up, and the judge is wearing this robe. The robe is not to remind people that the judge is in charge, although that's probably part of it. What I teach at Judicial College is it's to remind you that when you're sitting there, you're not sitting there as yourself. When you put that robe on, you are a symbol of the law, that you're sitting there as a representative of the law. And there are certain requirements, obligations that you have that are different when you're wearing that robe than when you're wearing a cool sport jacket. It's just different. And it reminds you of that, not of the power you have over people, but of the responsibility you have to people. It's as much for the judge's benefit or edification as it is for the people who appear before him or her. So getting into that zone was an important thing for me. I was 39 when I got on the bench. I was 59 when I got off. I thought it was time to go because I do think judges sometimes overstay, and as the longer you're there, sometimes the harder it is to get in that zone. cause you've seen too much, you know, it does start to wear you down a little bit if you're taking it seriously, to wear you down. And so, it's not for the faint of heart, I guess, is what it comes down to.
Judge, I know, and I've shared a little bit before about you, I know that as a prosecutor, and we're gonna talk about the death penalty, and we're going to debate that.
Yeah.
I know that you, tried a case as a prosecutor, at least one, where the death penalty was sought, and it was in fact granted. Can you talk about your view, your views on the death
Sure.
penalty changed it from becoming a judge, and just kind of
Yeah.
that experience being a prosecutor on that type of case, because it is not something that a lot of people have experience
Yeah,
with.
it's very rare, particularly in Jefferson County. So interestingly, I almost didn't get hired at the prosecutor's office because I was, on my resume, it said that I was a member of a group called Amnesty International, which is very much against the death penalty. We're also against torture, all kinds of bad things. And so my boss, Ernie Jasmine, was a great guy, but a strong advocate of the death penalty. He had kind of come to fame. They're this infamous, they call it the Trinity murders. These two kids from Trinity were assaulted, murdered, and it was a big to-do, and he had prosecuted that case. So he was very much an advocate of the death penalty. I don't want to say saying pro-death penalty is like saying pro-abortion. I mean, it's like you're not really pro-abortion. You're not morally opposed to it, is what it comes down to for most people. But Ernie was a proponent of the death penalty. He thought it had value. So we had a long discussion when I was being hired, or almost not hired, and what he did was basically see if he could qualify me for a death penalty jury. And here's who makes those decisions on a death penalty case. Is there anybody here who could not consider the possibility of imposing the death penalty under any circumstances whatsoever? Under any circumstances. Would it be anybody's first choice always? No. But there are circumstances where you could see yourself actually voting to impose that. Yes? Okay, you're all qualified. There are people who cannot do that, and there are also people who say, look, it's an eye for an eye. You take a life, you forfeit your life. You can't be on the jury either. What you have to be able to do is consider the full range of penalties before imposing the penalty. Remember, talking about individual justice that is appropriate to these circumstances. So I got hired. 2 years later, I'm head of the capital unit. The guy who's against the death penalty is head of the capital unit, which is, I think, a great thing, because you want people making decisions about the death penalty who are suspect of it, who aren't saying, everybody should get the death penalty. No, you should be very circumspect about when you file what are called aggravators, which we'll talk about. So
The capital unit, can you tell them just briefly?
capital unit is I was in charge of all the homicides, but homicides, murder is a capital crime. It carries a penalty of 20 years to 50 years or a life sentence. But if you file what's called an aggravator, that's when the death penalty becomes available. An aggravator is, the death penalty is only available where it's murder plus. Murder plus murder, murder plus rape, murder plus kidnapping, murder of a police officer, murder, what did I miss one? What was the name of those? So if it's that, the elected official can decide whether or not to make that one of the potential penalties available to the jury at trial. You still have to find the person guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and then you have a penalty phase, as you would in any other case, but it's much more involved. There's a lot more because the consequences are so huge and so irreversible that there's more due process involved in it. So yeah, I would qualify for a death penalty jury, but just barely. But that didn't keep me from being a prosecutor in a death penalty case, because it's not my decision. It's a decision that's up to the jury to decide. All 12 people have to agree that is what should happen. And you can't get, like we talked about before, you can't get 12 people to agree to leave a burning building. So when 12 people agree that the proof has been made and that this is the appropriate penalty, you should have great confidence that it makes sense. Even if you're against the death penalty, you have to respect the fact that those 12 people agree to that. So this was murder of a police officer, and there hadn't been a death penalty. The death penalty was suspended in 1972. The Supreme Court suspended it, and then it was reinstated in the 80s. And there had not been a death penalty verdict in Jefferson County up until this point. And this fellow, my fellow deputy sheriff rolls up on a guy who's beating the crap out of this poor kid, and the defendant bum rushes him, takes his gun, jams it to his face, and kills him. And then he tries to kill the kid too, but he stovepiped the gun, meaning it was jammed. It didn't. A semi-automatic pistol has a slide, and it ejects the shell. And the shell did not eject all the way because he had it jammed into his face. So there's a shell in the breech that keeps it from firing again. But he points at the kid and squeezes the trigger. About that time, all hell breaks loose, and he drops the gun and takes off. And then her father beats the crap. Her father's a big dude, and he was the first on the scene. He picked him up and slammed him. So this guy's on trial for capital murder. The reason he got the death penalty, which he ultimately did, his first one since they brought it back, was not, because since he was 18 years old, there'd only been about a total of 6 months that he'd been out of jail without hurting somebody. So he was constantly hurting people. You had a serious crime, you had overwhelming evidence, and the overwhelming evidence was that he had tried to make up a defense where he said that somebody had slipped him some bad acid and he was tripping when this happened. The problem was, for him, is it wasn't true, and we know it wasn't true because he had written a letter to his cellmate describing that he was going to make up this defense and wanting him to help. So when the jury saw that, it made him an unredeemable person. Here's a person who is not safe to live amongst us under any circumstances. So they, after hours of deliberation, they came back, and it was I still have a very clear picture in my mind of the filing of the court, because I'm thinking, were you going back there talking or arresting? Because they're disheveled, their hair's a mess, they're all crying. It was an impactful thing for them, because everybody else is just talking about it. Everybody's about suggesting what they do or arguing what they should do, but they're the people who made that decision, and they have to live with that for the rest of their lives. And they were carrying that weight when they came back into the court. It was intense. So they returned the verdict, and I remember it was on, if you knew, as the judge is flipping through the pages, it's on page 8 or 9. So if you knew that, he's like, the more he kept turning, the more tense it got for the people who knew. And when he stopped at page 8, there was this sound recorded. I mean, people don't take that stuff lightly. Nobody takes it lightly. But there's plenty of room for debate about whether it is a good thing or a bad thing, or what the value of it is in terms of, if this guy thought, hey, if I kill this deputy sheriff, I might get the death penalty, would that have stopped him from doing it? Probably not. Will it keep him from ever doing it again? Yeah, do that. But so would a life sentence where you can't get parole. So it's a important issue that is absolutely worth constantly discussing and revisiting. I wonder what 100 years from now, when people look back on medicine and law and whatever, what they'll think about us. Because if we look back 100 years from now, what do we think about medicine and law then? Everybody always thinks they're at the peak of civilization, and maybe they are, but it's not a flat line. It'll be interesting to think. I won't be here 100 years from now, but it'll be interesting to see if we were as advanced or evolved as we think we are, and how we deal with the problem of criminal justice.
We have about 5 more minutes. Does anyone have any questions for the judge? Judge, what's been your favorite career? You've been a state prosecutor, a federal prosecutor, and a judge.
It's the judge thing. There's no other public service job like that. I'll tell you, I got the job. So I never planned on being a judge. It was not on my career path. I was perfectly content at the U.S. Attorney's Office. I was what they called the violent crimes coordinator. So I tried mostly bank robberies and shootings on federal installations. It was a great gig. So I enjoyed that. My boss at the U.S. Attorney's Office was a fellow named Steve Pence. Steve Pence accidentally became lieutenant governor. And I say accidentally because the fellow who was running had to drop out because he didn't meet the residency requirement. So they tapped Steve to run. Now, Steve was a Republican, and the Republicans won for the first time in 60 years. There's a vacancy on the circuit court, and the way it works when there's a vacancy is the governor fills that vacancy, but to get to the governor, you have to get through a committee. And the committee is picked by the governors, 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, and somebody from the State Bar Association. The committee was the previous governor's committee. So in order to get that gig, you had to get through that committee to the governor, which meant you had to be a Democrat. You had to have Democratic credentials would be acceptable to the Republicans. They just weren't many people like that, I guess. So Steve calls me and said, hey, what do you think about this circuit court job? And I said, I never thought about it in my life. Why would I want to do that? It's all that civil crap. That seems like I'm perfectly content here. He said, and I said, why me? He said, well, here's how politics work. And this is the point of the story. To his credit, he said, here's how politics work. You pick the right guy for the job, and then you take credit for it. So 3 weeks after that phone call, I'm sitting on the bench. I mean, people plot and plan their whole lives to do this job, and it basically fell in my lap. So I've always felt a little guilty about how easy it was for me to get there. But I've never felt, I've also felt the awesome responsibility that goes with it. It was the greatest public service job imaginable for me. Because as I said before, you're making these really important decisions that impact people's lives, and they're sitting there looking at you. It is incredibly personal, it's incredibly powerful, and it's incredibly rewarding because of it.
Just so we're clear, because we've been learning about judges being elected versus appointed, and
Yep.
so after Judge Chauvin was appointed, he then had to
Exactly.
run in an election,
Right.
and
Which is
4 elections?
So
Three?
yeah, I had three times in front of, yeah, and, elections are, it was unopposed, which is, if you run opposed, you're unopposed. I suggest unopposed, it's much better. But it is, especially for judges, it's very hard because, who's your circuit court judge?
They've not met our circuit court judge yet. They've met Judge, do you remember who came in?
Dutton.
Judge Dutton.
Yeah.
Who's our district court judge.
Yeah.
Judge Brummer, Melanie Brummer is our circuit court judge, and she'll be coming in December.
And she's new. I knew the judge before. I know her, but I knew the judge before her very well. And here's the point of that. In a judge's race, that's exactly right. I don't know these people. There was an election yesterday. People had strong opinions about it. They knew or thought they knew something about those candidates that make a difference. When you vote for a judge, you really don't know. Even they got Shelby, Anderson, and
Spencer.
So 3 counties this judge covers. In Louisville, you're one of 13, but there's 1 million people there. And 270,000 people vote. They have no idea who to vote for. So you spend a year of your life trying to get people to remember your name, because that's all that ultimately matters when they vote for a judge. It seems like a terrible way to elect people, and it is, but we've been very lucky because the people who run, as a general rule, are people who are, the right people, that they want it for the right reasons. So we've been very lucky to have so many good judges, but as time goes on, I'm always afraid our luck's gonna run out, because if it says John Doe and Fred Doe, who do you vote for? If it says John Doe and Jane Doe, who do you vote for? Interestingly, 8 out of 10 women vote for Jane. And there she is now.
Thank you, Judge.
Yeah,